in the issue of global warming, it seems either you are on the talk show line in the afternoon and you say there is no such thing as climate change, or you say it's the end of the world. And this applies to both sides of the issue. I'd like to talk about how the facts appear to not matter. Things go unchallenged in the climate of extremes. People accept the strangest things without really fact-checking. And I'd like to begin on May 22nd, 2007, the Larry King Show. This is one exchange that lasted only a mere few minutes, if we could. There we go. Larry King Live on 2007. One exchange that lasted only a mere few minutes contained an incredible number of unfactual statements in it. It's between the Vice President. An unidentified woman calls and says, Vice President Gore, what issues caused by climate change globally are likely to affect the United States in the next 10 years? Vice President responds, the direct impacts on the U.S. have already begun. Today, 49% of America is in conditions of drought or near drought. So the implication is that global warming is increasing drought in the United States. Fine. This statement went completely unchallenged. How hard is it to check? It turns out it's 6 mouse clicks away. On the upper graph here is the percent of the United States experiencing drought conditions. This is something called the Palmer Drought Severity Index. It's a very, very common metric of climate that's been used for literally a half a century. And on the bottom are the Northern Hemisphere temperature departures from average from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of which, by the way, I am a member and a rather active one. What you see here, if you look on the y-axis, here's the 49% that Gore was talking about. Now, is there any relationship between this and global warming? You don't have to waste your time running Excel on this, because the correlation is obviously zero. Simple fact, not checked. Or we could look at longer-term climate history of the Pacific Southwest, which is one of the places we really care about drought. The Energy Secretary, Mr. Su, who has a Nobel Prize in particle physics, which really is somewhat not related to climatology, said recently that global warming will destroy agriculture in California and cause the loss of the major cities in California. This is absurd. But the reason he said that is because of stories about major drought in the Pacific Southwest and the Colorado River system. And in fact, if we take a look at the history of Colorado River stream flow as measured by tree rings and other kinds of fossils, this is by Dave Miko in 2007. Here's the more recent drought, and you can see that it is nothing compared to what we have seen. That's lowest in the current drought. Nothing compared to what we saw here in the 12th century. This thing lasted 60 years. So to say that there's any signal of warming in this record, which would begin somewhere around 1900, is absurd. Again, we have extremely wet conditions in the early part of the 20th century, which, by the way, resulted in the migration of people to California as a green paradise. I'll show you that in a second. And then it dried, and then it got wetter. In fact, let's segue to California. We have fires in California, Mr. Gore said in his response. Senator Reid chimed in a little bit later, by the way, not in the show. One reason we have the fires in California is global warming. Let me tell you about forest fires and range fires in California. They occur because it rains a lot in a previous winter. You've all been to California. By the time April 1st rolls around in Southern California, there's not a cloud in the sky, except for the morning fog if the marine layer is thick. And it does not rain until next October or next December, if you're lucky. And so it dries out every year to the point that normally you can support decent fires. But the fires become enhanced if the previous winter or the winter before that was very wet. The reason they become wet is because of El Nino. That causes excessive rain in Southern California. So one could have checked Gore's statement to see if indeed the frequency of rainy winters in California has been increasing. This is about 5 mouse clicks away from the United States National Climatic Data Center. This is the Southern California December-March rainfall. And you can see a very interesting thing. First of all, Most winters are actually pretty dry, around 10 inches. And you can see the El Niños poking above the mean here, where you either have a very dry winter or a very wet winter. And it's those that predispose Southern California to massive fires. This period here, by the way, of the current era obviously pales in comparison to the early 20th century when California was sold as a green paradise, as was Arizona, et cetera. And that began or continued some of the great outmigration to California, and it was a green paradise. Of course, in the summer, it exploded, but nobody lived there. Eventually, they moved in there and paid the price. Gore, in response to the 10-year question, this is a real whopper. You know, even a 1-meter sea level rise, even a 3-foot increase in sea level would cause millions of climate refugees. That's in response to a 10-year question. Let's check the sea level rise forecast from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These are the 100-year projections. This is A1b, which is called the mid-range emissions scenario. And if we take a look at the increases in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we are pretty much running on the A1b scenario. Anyway, the median value here is about 0.3 of a meter, but that's for 100 years. Let's turn it into English units. You have to divide by 10 to get to 10 years. The median value is 1.26 inches. You got away with 3 feet on the Larry King Show. We have a very serious threat of losing enough soil moisture in a hotter world that agriculture here in the United States would be greatly affected. This would be, I presume, in the next 10 years. Well, in fact, the planet has been warming, and you might want to take a look at agriculture in the United States with respect to warming. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's temperature history for the world. We have 2 periods of warming here, one in the early 20th century, which couldn't have anything to do with carbon dioxide because we hadn't put enough in the air. Then this period where it sort of cools a little bit, and then from here on out where we see warming beginning in 1977, a very interesting period beginning in 1998 where it doesn't warm, which I'll talk about in a second. But let's compare this to wheat yields and corn yields. Corn yields have quintupled in the United States. As the planet warmed a degree Celsius, they quintupled. You don't see, Paul Ehrlich, right around here, predicted they would begin to crash immediately. The Club of Rome, right around here, predicted they would begin to crash immediately. And they have continued at the exact same rate of increase that was established by the time people were talking about the end of the world. The climate of extremes began a long time ago, didn't it? And take a look here at wheat yields. You see wheat, which is much more drought tolerant than corn, shows an increase of about 100% over the course of the years. To take a look at agriculture just in general, let's get a little closer to home. This is Augusta County, Virginia, where I used to live. The mean annual average temperature is 53 degrees, annual precip 38 inches. Here is Sussex County in southeastern Virginia at 5 degrees warmer and about 20% more precipitation, and the corn yields are exactly the same. Why? Because people adapt. They adapt their practices. What's different between the temperature warming 5 degrees or a farmer moving from Suffolk County to Augusta County? The answer is absolutely nothing. So people adapt to very large changes. Well, that's the climate of extremes. Now, I'd like to ask a very, very interesting question in this climate. I'm going to ask you the question, have the global warming climate models failed? And this is touched on in the book. I want to expand on that. When we're talking about the effects of global warming, like Mr. Gore was talking about in 10 years, we start with changes in the atmosphere, meaning changes in the carbon dioxide concentration. We put them into climate models, and then we put these into usually economic impact models for agriculture or energy or whatever we might want to do. There are many of these models. I'm going to take a look at 21 of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change models. I'm going to look at the mid-range emission scenario, and I'm going to run these things for thousands of iterations. They give you different answers each time you run them because of round-off errors, because of very strange things. They have El Niños put in as random spots. They have cold La Niñas. So you can get, by running them for a very long period of time, the actual frequency distribution of warming trends that comes out of these models. And then you could make a statistical test, couldn't you? You could find out if the observed warming trends, say for 5 years, 6 years, on out to 15 years back, or even 20 years back are running at within the statistical confidence limits of these models.